Hey, welcome back to Already Overbooked. Today we're diving into Midwestern Gothic by Scott Thomas. This book is not just a regular novel, it's a collection of four Gothic horror novellas, all rooted in a eerie farmland, small towns, and unsettling quiet of the American Midwest. It's creepy, it's atmospheric, but is it actually good? I don't know. Let's go through and break it down. Let's jump into the plot summary. The collection, as I mentioned, is made up of four novellas, so let's jump into each one of those. The first one is A Door in the Field. We start with a blue-collar protagonist. He's a construction worker who decides to have a drink at a strange bar that shouldn't even exist. And what begins as a bad day starts spiraling into a nightmarish descent of blood, violence, and a surreal horror mixed as his ordinary life starts crashing into something supernatural. The second novella is Wear Your Secrets Like a Stone. This one leans heavily into that gothic tradition of hidden sins. A woman working at a big box store sets up a Halloween book display, but the books she unpacks don't just advertise spooky stories, they start opening a door to her hometown's darkest secrets. It's part haunted object story, part exploration of what happens when a community tries to bury its past. The next one is A Boy in the Woods, and arguably the most traditional scary story. This novella is set in a summer camp. On his last night, a young camper realizes that the adults are not who they seem. It becomes a story of survival, innocence lost, and facing evil when there's no one left to go through and protect you. The final novella was One Half of a Child's Face, and this one was the most surreal of the four. And it was about a recently divorced mother who notices her neighbors have a strange painting, and the children seem drawn to this picture's unsettling, ritualistic ways. And the deeper she looks into this painting, the more reality starts to unravel until she isn't sure if what's happening is psychological or something supernatural. And what ties these together isn't shared characters or even an overarching plot, but the backdrop of the Midwest town that feels empty and haunted. The landscapes that stretch forever and the unease that come from being so far from help. So jumping into the writing style, Scott Thomas writes horror like someone who knows exactly how to twist the knife without actually showing you the knife. His prose are deliberate. He builds tension slowly. He describes the creak of the floorboards, the emptiness of the fields, and the claustrophobia of what it's like living in a small town. You feel trapped, you feel unsettled, and then when you start getting comfortable in that dread, he hits you with something sharp and visual. The contrast between the atmosphere and the brutality is what makes his style really stand out. You'll get entire paragraphs of unsettling imagery followed by a line that makes your stomach drop. He also does meta horror very well. He occasionally goes through and winks at the horror genre itself, acknowledging its tropes, but also reworking it in a fresh way. His dialogue is modern, the characters seem so real, his pacing is cinematic, but his descriptive passages really push you back to that classic gothic horror type stories. Think of it as a blend of Stephen King's small town ease with that psychological edge and Thomas's own Midwestern grit. Let's jump into the themes and tones. And if I really had to go through and pin down Midwestern Gothic, I would say it's secrets, decay, and the ways our past refuse to stay buried. And each of these novellas has characters who try to move forward, only to discover the land, the community they live in is holding on to darkness like a stain that just won't wash out. And the Midwest itself becomes a Gothic character. The silence of the abandoned field, the suffocating closeness of a small town where everyone knows everybody and there's nowhere to hide or disappear within these towns. The tone throughout this four novellas is haunting. It feels oppressive. And even when you're not reading about like gore or monsters, there's a weight to the atmosphere. You feel like something bad has already happened before the story even begins, and you're just waiting for the floor to drop. There's also a big theme of childhood innocence being corrupted with the summer camps gone wrong, the children lured by a painting, or that generational trauma resurfacing in a town that won't change. It's very much a Gothic reimagining for the modern age. So, jumping into the pros and cons, and of course, we're going to start with the pros. The atmosphere is top notch. The Midwest comes alive in these stories, and I'm rarely seen in a horror story that puts us in the Midwest that feels familiar, threatening, ordinary, but haunted. Very well done. Love the atmosphere and the world building within these stories. I do like the variety of the storytelling. Each of the novellas has its own flavor of like psychological, campfire legends, surreal, gore heavy. You never get bored because the tone shifts, but it's still very cohesive within the story. The characters are very well done. Even though it is a novella, Scott Thomas gives enough emotional weight to the protagonist that you actually care about what happens to them. And then once you really care, he starts raising the stakes very quickly, and it's intense. The I did like the callbacks to his other works. I'm a big fan of Easter eggs. I mention this all the time on the channel. Any kind of call outs Easter eggs, so he does that within the stories. So if you're a fan of his work, you'll go through and see some callbacks to his previous stories. So some of the cons, there is uneven strengths. Not all novels hit the same. There's some that hit very well, they're fully realized, while others come across as more abstract and less emotionally satisfying, in my opinion. Overall, they were all great, but just some of them were a little bit more elevated than some of the other ones. I mentioned about tropes earlier in the review, so there is a lot of familiar tropes within this. So if you're familiar with horror stories, there's a lot of familiar tropes, and Scott does an amazing job with giving it a fresh look, but it still feels on some areas deja vu because it's like, oh, I've seen this before. If you're looking for a story that each of the novella has a connection, that's not really there within this story. There is the atmosphere and the location that's the same, but the people, the madness that occurs is all different. So if you're looking for like a shared universe thing, I don't think it's there. But again, it's still an amazing four different stories. There's times where some people might consider some of the stories are slow in the beginning, but I think the whole purpose was to really build on top of each other, really get you used to the world and what's the characters. And then once the intensity starts, the floor gets dropped underneath you and you're in for a wild Gothic ride. So let's jump into my final thoughts. Midwestern Gothic is Scott Thomas at his most confident. And he goes through and takes the Gothic horror tropes and planting them in the American heartland is so well done. It's a collection that thrives on mood, on dread, on atmosphere, while still delivering that occasional bloody payoff. Some of the novellas, as I mentioned, shine a little bit brighter, while the others are not as strong. But the collection altogether is undeniably impactful. By the time you finish, you're going to feel like you've walked through a terrifying cornfield or a terrifying haunted house. That you've seen things that you're not going to go through and forget. And for me, this story is easily an 8 out of 10 overall. It's one of those stories where even the weaker entries still had merit. And the best ones are going to stick with me for a long time. If you want a horror story that feels literary but also unflinching, this is a must read. So if you look for amazing horror stories, go through and pick up Midwestern Gothic by Scott Thomas. You're going to have a blast. It's going to be amazing. If you have already read this amazing story, let me know down in the comments which of the novellas were your favorite. I'm curious if my favorite is going to be on your list. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe. You know what to do. Till I see you in the next one. Stay overbooked.